Hello, I'm Hollie Powers Holt, and I have a business called Hollie Powers Holt Fine Art and a website which is Fine Antique Prints. I got into this business, if you want to go back to the beginning of time, when I was in middle school, and I had a wonderful art history teacher named Barbara O'Brien, who until recently has still been lecturing, and she got me totally hooked on the whole history of art, which I continued to do throughout college. And in college added some extracurricular activities that were multidisciplinary programs. One was called European Cultural Studies, which was a fabulous, one of the early programs to do this. It brought in people that knew about music and art and literature and science of different periods, and we actually focused on fin de siècle Vienna. But that kind of concentration has been very influential in my career choice, because what I found so intriguing about antique maps and prints is that they combine an interest in history and a beauty of art. These were often the second tier of artists earned their bread and butter by engraving, and they did a wonderful job. Here is a fabulous map of Spain that was done circa 1606 by Gerard Mercator, the famous author of Mercator's Projection of the World. And this is the original color as it was done in the early 17th century. It has these wonderful sailing ships and some sea monsters in the water. If I had known that these existed, or stopped to think about the fact that these existed when I was in college, I would certainly have done some sort of thesis on using maps, antique maps and prints as a springboard to my study. But I didn't. Fortunately, I found them within 2 days of handing in my senior thesis, and went to work for a somewhat notorious dealer where I learned a lot in the course of 13 years of running 2 galleries for him. And he had lots of material like this, and I have pretty much the same kind of inventory that he had then. This is another Mercator map, same thing. It's got original color. This original color has oxidized a bit more than the other, meaning that the copper content of the green coloring has turned a little bit brown. I love it because it's a sure showing that this is the original color, but there are some collectors who prefer to have their maps this prettier color and these prettier greens. So there's always kind of a balance in terms of determining value and what will appeal to people. So there's 2 maps by Gerard Mercator. They're just the only ones that I thought to pull this morning because they're so beautiful and so early. But one of the great things about antique maps is that you can find maps, particularly of Western Europe, from as early as the late 1500s that sell for a couple of $100s. And if you know the area, you'll recognize, even though the spellings probably will have changed and some of the geography may be slightly different than what we know it to be now, it's interesting to see what the area looked like at that time and how it was depicted. And it's so little money for something that dates back 300 years, 400 years in some cases. One of the other things that I handle that I really find interesting, I happen to have pulled a Philadelphia print. We have a selection of prints from all over the world, including one of Tokyo, which is fantastic, but a little harder for most people to figure out exactly what it's showing, since it is in Japanese and the orientation is not what we would expect today with north to the top of the page. This was engraved for the London magazine in 1761. It shows Philadelphia looking across the Delaware from Camden. Here is Christ Church, one of the early landmarks for Philadelphia. This was published in the London magazine as a promotional piece to encourage people to come to Philadelphia, which was a thriving port, and they emphasize this by
I would say exaggerating the numbers and different types of ships that were sailing in the Delaware, but nevertheless, it was intended to do that kind of promotional work and to show the city, which had these large buildings showing how sophisticated the city was, including this inset of the State House and then the battery on the river that protected the entrance to the harbor. So I love this for lots of reasons. It is a city, of course, that I know well, and it also, because of its purpose in the making of it. I also love it because I have the original text that accompanied it. So all these sort of parts that are historically important, I love to keep with the piece if I am able to do so. And this has that. That text describes these points on here. It's a key that shows where these buildings are and names them. So that, I think, is a very cool thing. And we have a lot of American, a lot of European, and then, as I said, some Asian city views like that. Something that I've started handling relatively recently are the Curtis photographs and photogravures. And this is a great kind of entry piece, I think, for younger people to start collecting. These were part of Edward Curtis's North American Indian portfolio. In fact, you can see that this was at one point bound into a volume. That's where the stitching held it in. They were based on Curtis's original photographs that he took when he went out west between 1907 and 1926, I believe, maybe 1930. And he did these on giant glass plate negatives. And the whole point of taking these thousands of photographs was in order to produce this work, this bound work, which was financed by J.P. Morgan. And Curtis was very concerned and interested in preserving what he saw of Native Americans, and he felt they were disappearing, their customs and their way of life and they themselves. So he really wanted to record everything. He also recorded soundtracks, I was reading the other night. And this, for instance, is showing a feast march. And you can see, you need to get fairly close up, but the detail that he captured in his original photograph was especially well relayed in this kind of print. He made several different versions, and this is done on tissue paper, which really held the ink and the grooves. So something like this, framed in this way, I have for $550. And unframed, such as this, again, this is a photogravure, is $300. But it is of the period, and I think that is really exciting, again, for why it was created, the purpose behind it, and the beauty of it are wonderfully appealing to me. This is actually one of his original photographs, so this would have come directly off of the glass plate negative. He took so many thousands of photographs that many of them were not included in the published bound work, and this is one of them. So one of the fun things I get to do is to try to figure out if, for instance, the Library of Congress, which has a huge stash of his original photographs, has this one and has a location and a title. Because right now I don't have either, but it does say Curtis in the lower left-hand corner, and that was something he scratched into the photographic plate before the impression was pulled. So this is the original photograph, and because it's small, there were several different formats, and the larger ones go for more money, and because it is not a recognized view that was in the portfolio, this I think I have $1,200 on. Framed, it's archivally framed. It's important to frame these photographs so that they're protected from light, and this one has been framed in that manner. So I think those are, and these work really well in traditional interiors, and also, of course, photographs have a great modern appeal as well, even though this series is finished by 1930. This is something that I'm bringing out because it's another great way to start collecting original antique maps in this case. This is the original color. This is a 1913 map from an atlas of the main line that was produced by the Pennsylvania Railroad. These are perennial favorites, inexpensive, $295 to the map of Wayne, and a few others go for considerably more money. But fun to see the names that people recognize. There's Clothier and Martha's Brown's Woods and Chews, and people who have lived in this area, particularly people who grew up in this area, will recognize these names as being some of the powerful movers and shakers at the turn of the 20th century. And it's fun to see what your house or your property, what was on your property at the time these maps were produced. And I have atlases from 1860 to 1926, I think is my most recent one. And these are two good examples of things I do not understand why people would buy something other than the original, because this is, the price is very low. In fact, reproductions of these sell for the same amount or sometimes more, possibly because you can get them in whatever size and whatever focus you want. But it doesn't have the originality of these tabs. The quality of this paper is quite good, and it is reinforced. It was reinforced at the time it was printed by being backed on linen. So it's pretty much indestructible and would be safe once it was framed for forevermore. The Curtis photogravures is another thing I do not understand why they are being reproduced, and they're being sold in the through the New York Times. For this I have for $300. I don't know about this particular image, but prints from the same series are being sold. Reproductions of them are being sold for $950 to $1,200. So why? I don't know. I would always rather have the original, and that's how I came to be in this business.